Send Help is a delightful return to form for horror master Sam Raimi, and Rachel McAdams gives a full-on tour de force in the lead role. Scott Pilgrim EX is another return to one of my favorite fictional worlds that left me wishing Canada was real. Not Suitable for Work is another Mindy Kaling sitcom, and I truly salute her efforts to breathe life into the Friends/New Girl hangout show Arms Race, and Avantika and Ella Hunt are especially fabulous in it. Avatar Aang: The Last Airbender has some of the most stunning animation I've seen all year, and I think it would handily make the upper list if it weren't for some mid-plot fumbles of the writing, but it felt exceptionally good to reassociate with this world and these characters nonetheless. Lego Batman: Legacy of the Dark Knight is the first Lego game I've tried in decades, even as a kid who sank many hours into classic Lego Batman and Star Wars, and I think it assembles a really fun hodgepodge of different Batman iterations with some addictive, if straightforward, gameplay. Gorillaz released their new album, The Mountain, and it's been sitting at the top of my Spotify all year, and they released it alongside an absolutely immaculate animated short film with love and effort that just shows in every inch and really sings to the mellow but adventurous spirit of the album as a whole. The Invite is Olivia Wilde's triumph, bringing a ton of well-earned praise and attention to theatrical crowds through a very stage play adjacent, normal domestic dramedy, and I really hope Oscar season remembers her for that. The Adventures of Elliot is Square Enix's delightful take on a top-down Zelda-like, and I've gotta celebrate another big role for my goat, Willow Angle.
To pass through that door is to pass through time.
Wuthering Heights, for all the fuss it was subject to, had a distinction as one of the nicest looking movies of the year aesthetically, boasting sets and costumes its competition couldn't hold a candle to, alongside an exquisite Charlie XCX soundtrack. Deltarune Chapter 5 is pretty damn breathtaking, and I repeatedly underestimate just how good Toby Fox is at upping the ante with each installment of his saga. And for my food recommendation of the season, I'm giving it to Grammy's Goodies. This is an Italian restaurant in my homeland of Colorado, and raised in an Italian-American household, the great praise I can give this place is I took my Italian family and we all agreed to add it to the list of legit regulars. The biggest buttery garlic knots you've ever seen, lasagna the size of Garfield himself, and the best damn Italian rainbow cake I've ever had. I did a small bit of research to find a restaurant that would be special to go to celebrate, because I wanted to commemorate a big landmark for myself. This summer is also special because I'm officially a published movie critic. You can follow and find my writings on videolibrarian.com, who had enough faith in my findings to make this small dream come true and start a new adventure and era for myself. You may have noticed a sort of shift on this channel in way of the focus and content. It doesn't mean I'm necessarily going away, I'm just adjusting with changes in my life, which is scary and exciting, and I've got 12 other new things I've loved over the first half of this year that I want to talk about. The new challengers roll out now. While back, I was disappointed enough by Mario and Luigi Brothership that I resolved to stop buying lower grade spin-offs within the Switch generation simply because my friend Mario is on the cover. Anyway, the first item on this list is Mario Tennis Fever, which does have some of those disappointing zombie Mario game aspects that I really dread in these new Mario spin-offs, to a point that I'm left wondering if my glory days playing my beloved Mario Sports spin-offs on the Nintendo 64 and GameCube just always had lifeless UI, bare-bones features, and character animations that just don't flourish with the personality they used to. But boasting the biggest character roster of any Mario sports game was enough to draw me into this one. I mean, what am I gonna do? Ignore the playable debut of Baby Waluigi? Guess again, paisanos. Though the really big achievement of Fever as a game that puts it on this list is the addition of Fever Rackets. These are a pretty straightforward mechanic. Different custom rackets that give you a meter you can spend to impact the court with different iconic Mario powers and paraphernalia. Seems pretty elementary until you acknowledge the genius caveat that a fever shot and its effects can be returned to sender by intercepting the ball before it bounces off the court the first time. The detrimental impact of fever rackets are no joke, meaning when your opponent lines one up, the game becomes a hectic rush to send the effect back, which then opens your opponent to intercept before a bounce and send it back back, resulting in these high-intensity volleys that can leave me feeling like I've just run a marathon. I've blistered my thumbs on high difficulties getting into straight-up clashes like these that elevate this game a good step above its station. One of my weekly go-to podcasts is Doughboys, hosted by comedians Nick Weiger and Mike Mitchell, who assemble a coterie of peers in their field of eating junk and joking about scat in the name of reviewing fast food. I've talked a little about this show before, and I feel compelled to reiterate that despite the show's pretty surface-level premise, following the broadcast for years is a rich tapestry.
I was just saying I had no stake on it. But Piggy got his steak.
You
so
got some steak. There was very little steak on mine, Mitch. The whole fucking point is there wasn't much steak on any of it. I showed you I had two little fragments of steak across my whole portion.
And was Piggy happy?
Piggy was not happy. Piggy was pretty angry.
I love my long-term podcasts and feeling ingratiated to inside jokes to a point of Rupert Pupkin-esque parasocial fantasies, something fueled further by the Doughboys Kids Club, a periodic package subscription of Doughboys swag, including merch and cute little toys, and among them all, the Doughboys comic, where every nonsensical observation and bit from the podcast is inflated into a zany cross-country adventure between the titular boys. Chiefly, artists Fred C. Stressing, Alex Fearer, and Meg Casey turn the slop-critiquing clowns into an absurd cartoon with a vibrant style that clutters all of their crass lingo and in-jokes into a big bowl and mixes well. It's the kind of thing that approaches gibberish to the uninitiated, but being aware of that makes it all the easier to giggle at. Look, I performatively hated the Minions just as much as anyone did as an edgy teen, but I think when you reach a certain age, a switch flicks in your head that makes you unbearably maternal toward those little would-be villainous tater tots. And for me, I guess that age was 29, because I love minions and monsters. The premise of this movie's a rather novel one, taking the Minions' prehistoric origins and covering a tribe and era that wound up in Hollywood during the 1920s. Given the Minions' inclination toward physical comedy as opposed to anything explicitly verbal, their humor, if in a juvenile way, owes a lot to the wordless iconography of the likes of Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, which makes this framing for the characters downright organic, and all the more touching from the primary point of view of James, the creative minion with dreams of being a great filmmaker. Perhaps this is casting pearls before swine to bestow this kind of praise at the little Facebook bananas, but anyone that shares my love of film, I've seen deeply affected by the earnest affection and homage for the medium of movies expressed through James and his narrative. Illumination movies over the years have really raked in some good budgets too, and while I think the character designs still have room for improvement, the speed and color with which the characters engage in hijinks is just splendid. I know Illumination has become a big public enemy #1, but if Pixar can corner the market on animation that makes you cry, I see nothing but a net positive if Illumination wants to make animation that makes us laugh and maybe even inspires us. Hacks is an HBO series focused on Deborah Vance, a comedian who is, in her older age and traditional mindset, losing touch with her audience and show business itself, prompting her to forge an uneasy unity with Ava, an aspiring writer with a more progressive millennial point of view. And this odd couple over 5 seasons that just this year wrapped up took me on an emotional roller coaster. Not just the funniest show I've watched in ages, but one that really resonates emotionally too. It's a typical odd couple premise, and there's everything fun that comes with that here, but as much of the show is about the two leads butting heads, it's never squarely about one character always being right or wrong compared to the other. Jean Smart and Hannah Einbinder have chemistry you could never hope to replicate as they navigate the hurdles of Hollywood and learning from each other. Neiman Marcus geriatric and a bisexual youth activist, locating the things they have in common among their sea of differences in a way that's personally enlightening and endearing. I largely write off TV series in the streaming age as chips, compared to even the lamest movies being a plated and prepared entree. The way shows now feel intentionally disposable and meant to just be scarfed down. There's obviously exceptions that prove that rule, and Hacks is maybe the greatest. For every episode I'd highlight as the hardest I've laughed in years, there's emotional beats, most of all in the series finale, that leave me gobsmacked with how these characters can make me cry just as soon as they left me rolling on the floor giggling. And while I wouldn't trade the ending of this show for anything, if someone offered me a Jimmy and Kayla spinoff, I wouldn't turn my nose up. Early chunks of this year in movies were admittedly a bit disappointing, not bereft of impressive new releases by any means, just a harder one to find a new release I could really click with in a way that felt like my movie this spring. That excitement I was chasing felt well scratched at last by Obsession, a movie you've probably heard of if you're not watching this video from under a rock, but nonetheless one that's earned its praise. You've almost definitely gotten at least a glimpse of Mickey, whose universally lauded performance by Indy Neverati has cemented her as a modern horror icon already. But what I think smaller scale horror like this has an opportunity for, distinctly, is introducing performances that feel huge and star-making in even small junctures. Michael Johnson is a pitch-perfect, pathetic bastard as Bear, and Cooper Tomlinson and Megan Lawless round out an ensemble of understated but deeply lived-in characters that feel like personifications of every reaction you could have to this deeply unsettling weekend the characters are plagued within. It's a breed of ensemble only scary movies can produce, and this movie delivered on the scary in spades. I consider myself pretty constituted for scary stuff, and I had to shut my eyes at a point or two of this movie. In tandem with all of that, if you could indulge the box office football corner of my brain for a moment, seeing this movie alongside Backrooms form a pretty impenetrable grip on the culture in a way that kept the more tired summer slot movies in the dust and portentously underperforming just felt like a huge decisive victory for more esoteric genre works in our culture. And that movement couldn't have been spearheaded by a better movie. A shoestring budget and largely unknown pedigree, blasting off into the stratosphere out of nowhere with a peerless debut. It's fallen well within vogue to switch up on Invincible, as many have begun decrying the series, as Amazon's mishandling of the IP has really started to rear its ugly head in some regards of the show's production. But personally, my love for the show has me at a point where it would take far more missteps for me to abandon ship. In fact, the climactic moments of the most recent season, I'd argue, are some of the best the show has ever had, and my hype for it has gone nowhere. And I find my loyalty rewarded further with the release of Invincible Versus. A fighting game involving these characters right off the bat is a match made in heaven. But this promise was only fulfilled further as we learned this would be handled by the developers of the recent Killer Instinct revival and idealized in the vein of Marvel vs. Capcom 3. And as someone who vulnerably admits my enthusiasm for fighting games far outpaces my skill, those inspirations burst to life the second the controller is in your hand, as I was Anton egoed into the easy to try and rewarding to master combo and tag team mechanics I got a foothold of using Super Scroll and Virgil when I was a teenager. On a less mechanically dense note, if I had to indicate where this game lies in my heart, I'd say that Invincible the show is part superhero serial and part soap opera. A lot of the characters boast these fantastical powers and premises, but their arcs are far more angsty and emotional as opposed to action-oriented. And what's really cathartic about this game is that it plucks those characters out of that MO and into fast-paced combat the show can't always afford, filling in that blank spot of how these characters use their powers in a way that blows my imagination out of the water, turning folks like Bulletproof, who's that kind of unhelpful douchebag in the cartoon, into a character I feel fully affectionate toward as one of my big-time mains. I was excited to learn there was a new Steven Spielberg movie coming out this summer. He's the most iconic filmmaker ever. If all the auteur directors were put in a kart racer, he'd be the Mario with balanced stats and accessible items. But that's not to say he lacks a characteristic slant that can be seen endlessly in Disclosure Day. This was a pretty polarizing release. It's a weird one that virtually no one I'm super close to liked nearly as much as I did. And you seem to either be fully in the pocket for it or you feel thoroughly alienated by it. No pun intended. Platforming my more contrarian voice is a habit I've been trying to temper, but I feel a lot can be illustrated if I bring up a movie on a similar subject that was on the flip side widely beloved, but I felt rather disappointed by, that being Project Hail Mary. That movie had respectably lofty and dark ideas to dissect, but these always felt secondary to a traditional hero character in Ryland Grace. Far more interesting to me were the technicians that had families at home at stake, the fellow astronauts fully prepared to die in space, the security guards who find small ways to find joy escorting NASA fugitives. And Disclosure Day feels more like a movie that focuses on those characters. Not elements that have the weight of the world on their shoulders, but ones who perceive their only choice as using their voice no matter how small. Emily Blunt is the movie's lead and the hero of her story, but she's one small cog in a huge operating machine in a way that really sold the gravity of the matter and how much courage it takes to play her role. Asterisk, Blunt is absolutely fabulous in the movie, undoubtedly my pick for Best Lead Actress of the year so far. At the risk of putting too fine a point on it, I'd lay out that this movie is an interesting addition to the canon of Hopecore, a movement many would use to describe a mentality swooping away from cynicism and toward optimistic heroes that audiences crave in these dark times. Project Hail Mary and Superman, among others, hailed as inspirations to kindness and earnesty in a time where those values feel bereft and scarce. I paint myself as a dissenter from the enthusiasm of these works, not to yuck anyone's yum, but to illustrate where Disclosure Day lands and how it may do so for viewers who align closer to where I am. That being that those prior films, for all their ingenuity and good intentions, felt here and there like they were breaching topics of kindness and hope to kids. And Disclosure Day breaches them while reminding you how unabashedly harrowing it is to stand by those principles, speaking to its audience like they're grown-ups, without shedding any childlike wonder that goes hand in hand with that need for looking at the bright side. And it does so in a way that only Spielberg can manage. James Cameron is my all-time favorite filmmaker, Billie Eilish is among my top 5 favorite musicians, and the two teaming up turned out to be even better than I ever could have imagined. Not that it was super intuitive to imagine in the first place, but here I am praising how much I loved Hit Me Hard and Soft the Tour in 3D. The concert documentary where Big Jim himself captures Billie Eilish's powerful performing in the genius lens of his camera. The legendary filmmaker and longtime family friend of the pop sensation took such a liking to Billie's music that they agreed to a joint effort to bring a compiled performance of Eilish's Hit Me Hard and Soft tour to big screens. Cameron's filmmaking genius that made cinematic history with Titanic and Avatar could likely find a compelling way to record footage of paint drying, which leaves very little to guess as to the sheer electricity and excitement that Cameron's camera work begets when it has a performer as versatile and energetic as Billie Eilish to focus on. Some may bristle at the overall strangeness of the project on paper, but as the documentary progresses, it becomes clear that this unexpected duo came together to learn from one another just as much as supplementing each other. We see in spades how the less sentimental James Cameron is taken in by the deeply reflective and thoughtful junctures Eilish bestows herself and her entourage that births the magic of her onstage acts that sell out stadiums globally. Watching this party come together in a theater skyrocketed my heart rate and left me in need of a calming production puppy room. A blessing and a curse of adapting something like The Odyssey is that it's a story retold so many times with countless adjustments and concepts that it doesn't just leave huge shoes to fill, it practically begs anyone taking up the challenge to change those shoes into sandals, cowboy boots, sneakers, anything to cut a distinction in a sea of ideas. Director Christopher Nolan, in his take on The Odyssey, perhaps characteristically bites the bullet and gives us a straightforward, brutal, but captivating image of ancient Greece, told through the lens of one of his huge Hollywood all-star ensembles, and the final result is great. The anachronistic dialogue takes some getting used to, but it also makes the characters feel rooted in human emotionality. Matt Damon's Odysseus carrying some of his DNA as a Boston hardhead that translates strangely well to the clever, principled Greek hero. This feels very authentically like a dramatization of everything I learned about the Odyssey in high school without any major zigs and zags, and I think this is well to the film's benefit. The great renditions of different iconic Greek heroes and villains brought to life by Hollywood's finest A-listers in ways that if I dared to describe one by one, it would fill a novel. But I think Pattinson and Jon Bernthal land as the real show stealers. Cliche as it feels to say, the settings of the Odyssey are every bit characters unto themselves, and Nolan taps into this by exposing talents of cinematography I never saw in him before. The lush, naturalistic valleys, caves, beaches, and oceans that Odysseus ventures across are full of life and color in a way that's a far cry from the chrome, concrete desolation occupied by Oppenheimer, Batman. I find, given one's taste in Greek myths, and separately Christopher Nolan's films, one's mileage may vary with this one. But I find the scope and effort taken with a budget that's still comparable to most other competition this movie shares a box office with is well worth the rapturous praise. Nolan isn't on my right hand of favorite film bro auteurs, but this is my favorite thing he's ever made, handily. Marco's Got Money Troubles focuses on its titular character, who encounters titular financial challenges. Margot is a college student who gets romantically involved with her professor, which ends in her pregnancy. A single mom with sparse resources, Margot finds online work producing content for, I don't know what YouTube's policy actually is for mentioning that website. I know some social medias are weird about it. The blue and white content site. If the premise sounds exploitative or leery, I want to assure you that Margot's Got Money Problems has its heart and point of view in the right place. They're drawing humor on the awkwardness of catering to a user base with eclectic interests. With that in mind, the humor of the series rarely feels at the expense of Margot for engaging with her fans, or on her fans for being lurid or patronizing her talents. It's a very honest look at sex work, while Margot's outer life is the emotional linchpin, as she fights the father of her child for custody and juggles the involvement of her own parents and the reality that they both have flaws they've passed down to her, which she in turn risks passing down to her newborn son. Each episode had me digging my nails in my sofa praying that baby Bodhi would get to stay with his mama, and that says a lot considering the subplot of the same episode focused on comparing male extremities to Pokemon. Michelle Pfeiffer and Nick Offerman give deeply powerful, cathartic performances in support of the transcendent Elle Fanning, who's been on a serious upward trajectory in film lately. I've loved her in Sentimental Value and A Complete Unknown lately, and this feels like the lead showcase she's long been capable of. Delivering some lines with such raw emotion that cracks me up, but also delivers a metric dictionary of subtext, which paints a vivid image of Margot as a character and where she is. Like I said, compared to movies and games, a new TV show has to do a lot to impress me and keep me tuned in for an entire season, and this show made that task feel as easy as it ever has. Vidiots is a video store in Eagle Rock, LA, open since 1985, that's transformed and reopened over the years, currently taking the form of a repertory theater that still houses a massive library of DVD rentals. This place has become a near essential for my quarterly-ish trips to see my friends in LA. The establishment boasts thousands of options for rental, and in a time where media preservation is more tumultuous and crucial than ever, there's very little that thrills me more than organizing a little list of movies I can't rent or stream digitally for some evil reason, and finding the decade-old DVD just waiting for me at Vidiots, which is how my friends and I experienced obscure gems like the incredibly rare Hideki Anno adaptation of Cutie Honey, a Shin magical girl that feels like what you'd expect from a YouTube fan film budget brought to life vibrantly by the imagination that brought us Evangelion. Vidiot's also hosts repertory screenings far outside the comfort zone of your everyday IMAX chain. It was here that my friends and I caught the surreal but historic Hungarian Fantasia, Son of the White Mare, as well as Pink Floyd's The Wall. Movies I had slim chances of just happening upon, let alone allowed to enjoy on a big screen. This is the kind of place that bolsters film of every ilk and makes it accessible and rapturous. Bless the staff and people behind this. I'm a proud Vidiot Church convert. When I select Pokemon Pokopia on my Nintendo Switch 2 game menu, I often am not sure where to start. A conundrum I face just as well as I challenge myself to write about it. Let me start by saying my favorite game last year was Donkey Kong Bonanza, a game I've been waiting years for and one that I picked up at launch in the middle of the summer and worked my way with it up to being my most played Nintendo Switch 2 software in a sheer number of hours. I expose this because I had already exceeded the number of hours I played Bonanza while owning it for close to a year within 2 months or so of owning Pokopia. This game captures my inclinations and imaginations that much, more than any game I've played in my life, I think. You play as a Ditto dropped into a world that's desolate and empty. Mankind is nowhere to be found, meaning it's up to you to revitalize the world around you as you recreate habitats with the materials you find and items you craft. You make friends with Pokemon who teach you moves and skills that'll help you create more habitats with more materials and items. The world of Pokemon is your cloister. Even as someone who's never been a Minecraft kid, I spent hours terraforming, building bridges, and making this world perfect for my Poke neighbors. Playing from the point of view of a Pokemon yourself lets you feel closer than ever before to the other Pokemon. Even after fighting alongside them for years, I can say this is the first time I felt for certain that Mr. Mime is my friend, and Poliwrath is my friend, and Professor Tangrowth is my friend. These friends inhabit a world that is enormous on top of that, and 100% customizable. You get the biggest sandbox I've ever encountered in a game, again, as not a huge open world guy, but not an inch of it is off limits to your creativity. With enough effort and ingenuity, you can turn Pokopia fully upside down and make it whatever you want, while Pokemon travel and interact with it like your own little virtual ant farm that your imagination was always fueled by, even back when your Pokemon were like 8 pixels on a tiny LED screen. Games like these sometimes overwhelm me, but having so many Pokemon to discover and a pitch-perfect drip feed of abilities and mechanics to expand your skill set with the world around you made this easy to return to over and over. And even after I uncovered so many secrets and landmarks and legendaries and endings, I'm filled with joy that I know there's aspects of this game I still need to uncover and complete. I can throw it on for 10 minutes or so and just cozily attend to my Pokemon friends' needs and comforts, or I can launch into an hour upon hour project building something insane, and either one scratches my brain in a way I haven't felt since Animal Crossing New Horizons saved my life during COVID. It's not just one of the best Pokemon games ever, I consider it something of a galling triumph of digital design. I can't begin to fathom the work that went into making something so massive and thorough and wonderful. And I hope in the second half of 2026, I can find something I like half as much as this game. And I hope the same is true for you. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in my next one.